Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the History of Fan Anime. I'm your host, William Chow, and today's episode is another fun episode. I was going through my cell phone here, and I was going through some of the old ringtones I used to have for all the various different members and the people that hung around my store at Anime Jyanai. So we basically, assigned different ringtones and different nicknames to all the different people. And so today's episode, I'm gonna cover the first part, which is basically how some nicknames and things are assigned to different people. Okay, now this sort of tradition and this act of assigning nicknames is probably nothing really too different in other social groups, right? Obviously, on a sports team or in a clubhouse or whatever, people would stop, addressing everyone so formally, and they basically will start adopting nicknames to different people based on different things they have done or different interests that they have. Now, again, since we're all sort of in this sort of anime community, a lot of the references and that kind of stuff happen to be mostly anime references. Okay, now this sort of phenomenon really only exists, in the early days, where anime clubs and anime meetings and video showings and that kind of stuff were a thing, where people gathered together and you physically met people. I'm going to distinguish the difference between this is because in the modern era, okay, all you new people have things like Twitter and Facebook and things like this, where you've already got handles or tag names or nicknames or gamer profile names and that kind of stuff already made up. But the thing about those is, of course, you chose those handles. Okay, so because of people when they meet you, because they've already seen your name on Twitter or your handle on a video game or something like that, they refer to you as that, and that sort of becomes your name because that's what you gave them yourself, or that's how you were introduced in the group because that was what your Twitter handle, Facebook handle, or whatever happened to be. Okay, so in this era where we didn't have things like Twitter, Instagram, and all of their stuff, a lot of times these nicknames are generated by events and things that happen to you, or things that become appropriated at the time those things happen. So this episode, I want to go over some of the nicknames and that kind of stuff that are associated with my ringtones to help me identify certain people that, again, became the regular customers, the regular friends that hung out at Anime Jyanai. Okay? So, I'll play a little bit of the sample and, of course, go through the story of how those names got attached. Okay? So, let's begin. Okay, so the first one on the list, I'm just going to sort of go through them in sort of alphabetical order because that's how they're sorted in my iPhone. Okay? I'm going to start with Chad. Okay? Now, the song that they picked, of course, is Weird Al Yankovic's "Fat." Okay, now this isn't so much to be fat shaming him or anything like that, because again, he was a little bit on the overweight side. But the reason why I picked this particular song is because when in the era that we were making up nicknames and songs and that kind of stuff, one of the things that we were going to try to do is we were going to try to use essentially the "Fat" song and change it into porn, okay? Because one of the things that we did, or Chad did when he came in and looked on the BBS, he kept going on to all the the alt binaries obviously different things like porn, sex, whatever, and he kept going to all of those various different news groups looking for different stuff. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to make a song, parody song of "Fat," but instead of "Fat," use the word "porn" or something, and then kind of write a song around that. We never really did finish that, so yeah, it stuck that way. So because of that, I kept that part and kept that part of the ringtone. Of course, nowadays this could be very seen as very unpolitically correct, and could be considered to be fat shaming and all this other stuff in our overly political world that we live in now. But again, that was what we originally used as my ringtone for chat. The next one that I'm going to use is Colin. Now, Colin was a really big fan of Transformers. Okay, so much so that he collected all the various different Transformer bits and that kind of stuff. He was really big on all the model kits and that kind of stuff. So I gave him the Transformers theme song. Okay, now the next one was kind of a strange one, an interesting one. My translator Daisuke. Now I could have given him a lot of different things because as I said, he's a really big fan of Kenichi Sonoda and all the Golf Force stuff, Assemble Insert, Aerial. But of all things that we really had the most amount of laugh about and that kind of stuff, and the most kind of is those strange Aniki characters from the hidden stages in Langris, and of course from the game Chow Aniki. So I decided to use the ever famous Zun Cha 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 thing song from the Aniki soundtrack, and use that for his ringtone, and that sort of ended up being his sticking fame. So for him, that's what I used. And again, one of these episodes, I'm gonna have to get into the whole inside joke of the Anikis, and we'll do that in a future episode. The next one is Dan. All right. Now he himself, he gave himself the nickname Sai-D, but again, instead of picking a song from Sice or something like that, I decided to use Dan Dan, which is the opening theme song for Dragon Ball Z. The next one is Fonda. Okay. Now again, he worked at a lot of computer places, including Electronic Arts and that kind of stuff. So I could have picked something like that. But the most common name that comes with the name Fonda obviously is the Fonz, okay, from Happy Day. So it seemed very appropriate that if we're going to call him Fonz, then we may as well use the Happy Days theme for him as the ringtone. So I use that one for him. The next person who I have on my phone is Harry. Now Harry unfortunately is no longer with us, but since he was the one that was so avidly into playing different games, mainly things like Magic the Gathering, and of course a lot of the other games that we played, like Warcraft, Starcraft, and that kind of stuff, and all the other various assorted types of games that he was all really interested in. It just seemed fitting that I use Games People Play from the Alan Parsons Project as his ringtone sound. That seemed most appropriate. The next one is Harvey. Now Harvey is the big civic car buff in our group. So again, he goes all to these. For the most of us, he's probably the closest to to a racer, if you will. So he is the one that's avidly into modifying the car and doing different things with the car. Of course, at this time, Initial D is being one of the most big animators of the time. So I decided to pick one of the Initial D songs. His ringtone. Next one is Hugh. Now, the biggest game at this time for the PlayStation was Final Fantasy. Okay, now Final Fantasy. Now, one of the biggest games at this time was Final Fantasy for the PlayStation. And again, one of the key songs out of that one, of course, is Fei Wong, Eyes on You. So I decided to use that song for his. We'll play that down. Again, Hugh is a big collector of video games and mangas and anime videos and stuff. But again, at the time was very popular. Final Fantasy was a really big thing because of the entire line of 6, 7, of course 8 coming out. That seemed to be a really good fitting choice. Okay, the next one is Jack. Okay. So with a name like Jack, well, it's pretty obvious in an anime theme, you gotta use the theme for Captain Jack. Again, DDR being a very, very popular thing in the arcades and a very popular game at this juncture. So that would be the perfect theme for making Captain Jack. Okay. The next one is John. Okay, John's one of our other Japanese people that is able to do some translations and that kind of stuff. And so the way that John got his nickname attached to the ringtone is I gave him the ringtone for GTO, which is Great Teacher Onizuka. All right. Now John, his last name is Otsuka. Okay, so it's kind of close, so we decided to go with GTO. Decided to go for the call. give him the title of the GTO, and then we'll give him that name. And then basically, there's a whole other story that transpired, which involves him getting the tag of Sensei. So the story behind John and the connection between him and Sensei is that also at this time was an anime called Red Riding Hood Cha-Cha, and the teacher in this story is Rascal Sensei, basically the teacher who basically whips his kids, whips his students, right? So that basic connection transpired when one day Kevin was playing Langrisa or something on the game consoles, and some sort of weird whipping or Jo-sama thing started happening, and that's how basically the association. Well, okay, we're gonna tag John as the Rascal Sensei, and then of course because of his name, we attached that to the GTO and made him the Great Teacher, and therefore yes, GTO becomes his his nickname. And then of course the aforementioned Kevin, of course. He's our video game player that sort of, when he first came to the store, was playing a lot of things like Langreaser, and he played the entire series through all the different sort of consoles. However, I got it for the Saturn, or for the PlayStation, PC Engines, TurboGrafx, Super Nintendo's, Sega Genesis. Whatever version I got, he ended up coming over and playing that game. And he did, virtually all the different levels and that kind of stuff. So, he famously known was for Langreaser, so I picked one of the songs from Langreaser as his ringtone. Okay, the next one is King, okay? Now, with a name like King, the only other character that I can think of that has that same name, King, is from the King of Fighters. So, I decided to use a audio editing program. And basically I mixed all the sound effects for King and played it with the background of the King of Fighters 95 opening. Basically put them all together, chained them into a sound sample, and basically made it within 30 seconds so that it'll fit into an iPhone. And that's basically what I use for King ringtone. Now the next one is Michael. Now because of how it's spelled, it looks more like Mikhail, okay? Now, I many people have already addressed him as Michael, but because of the way how it's spelt, and I've always pronounced it Mikhail. Because of the way that I pronounce his name as Mikhail, I've decided to use USSR as the name of the song that I'm going to use as his ringtone. Not that he is Russian, or not that racially discriminate him as being Russian or Soviet, but that is just sort of the history of how I tagged that song to his The next ringtone I had made is for Rob. Okay, now he gives himself the title of the editor, of course, which makes it kind of think of like news and editing and that kind of stuff. But he was a big fan of Evangelion, okay? So much so that, he was sort of like, the de facto expert of that kind of thing. So, with that, I decided to give him the theme song for Evangelion as his ringtone. Although, this is a case where, if I went off of his nickname that he chose himself, then I might have picked something else that, referring to editing and that kind of stuff or whatever, okay? But that's sort of the distinction. Once you get sort of, labeled with a nickname, then that's sort of, your role that you get. The next one is Ron, okay? Now, my friend Ron is one of my earlier anime fans before I opened up my store. Ron ended up moving to Hong Kong in order to work for Hong Kong Gas. And so for that reason, I decided to pick a Cantonese song for him as his ringtone, which was Allentown's Red Wine. Basically, the cover of the Asian Sky song, Kokoro no Red Wine. Okay? The next one is Sam, okay? Now, we've called him, the nickname that we've given him is, Big Chief No Jerky, Okay, now he is a native, native Indian slash, basically you can call him the Aboriginal people. Okay, that's the politically correct thing to say. But at the time, um, we just, we gave him the nickname, of course, Big Chief. And the story of how we call him No Jerky is because, again, he didn't live in Vancouver all the time. He lived in a place called Vernon, further north. And when he'd come in, he'd always bring in some like salmon jerky or like deer jerky and that kind of stuff, which was really, really good. It never lasted very long because everyone just sort of gulped that stuff down. And so, but one time he decided to come over, and I don't know exactly. I don't remember exactly the excuse. He might have said something like his brother ate it, or maybe he ate it on the way down. But he ended up showing up down in Vancouver, but he had no jerky with him that time. So from that point, he got penned the name Big Chief with no jerky. Okay. Again, not to say, not to really, discriminate against Aboriginal people, but again, in this politically correct world that we live in now, that was the nickname that we assigned him. So with that, the song that I decided to give him was "Beds Burning" by Midnight Oil. Next one is Sheldon. Now, Sheldon, again, was also one of my very early anime friends, and he's probably one of the ones that got me introduced into Zeta Gundam. So for that, I decided to use Zeta Gundam as his opening theme music. Now, the special one that I decided to pick was the one from the TV version, which has the Zeta Gundam shooting at the very, very beginning of it. So I had to make sure that when I made the cut for iTunes to fit into the iPhone, I had to make sure I picked the first 30 seconds of that TV opening for that version. So that's why I use Zeta Gundam for Sheldon. Okay, the next one is Vince. Now Vince is one of our, shall we say, martial artists. Studying to be a martial artist. Type of person. So he studies all various different types of things like the Eskrima and Aikido and different things like that. Okay. So for that, of course, the most obvious song we use is Kung Fu Fighting. So the next one is Waifu. Okay. Now, with a name like Waifu, it's really hard to to match up with anything. But it just happens that with Gundam Wing, there's a character named Wu Fei. So we, because it's so very close, we decided to start assigning him the nickname Wu Fei. Okay. So with that, obviously, then I decided to use Gundam Wing as his opening music. So that's just sort of a quick run through of some of the ringtones and that kind of stuff that I've made for some of the people that hang out at Anime Jyanai at the time, and I basically used all these different songs as custom music for when people either called me or left me messages and that kind of stuff. I would hear this tone out of my phone. Now, not everybody that I have on my list, has one of these ringtones, because of course, it takes time to, to chop a music sample down to 30 seconds to fit into the phone as a ringtone. But this is the ones I sort of worked on and had going, and had in my phone. So while I was doing some cleaning up, I managed to find this list of old things, and I put them into my phone as my current ringtones. Okay. Now, this again, covers some of the stories and some of the ideas of how we assign nicknames to different people. Again, at the time, we weren't all so, sort of say politically correct about, racial things or, any sort of discriminatory type of things or any sort of, special sensitivities that people have. It is sort of, in many ways, a rite of passage. If you get assigned a nickname by your group and you accept that nickname, or you take that nickname in stride, then it's almost like you've become initiated, or if you become into the group, as it were, accepted into the group. If you gain a nickname of this stature, again, in this sort of situation, again, it is best that the group assigns you the nickname, not you pick your own nickname, or you get you pick your own assigned gamer tag or profile or whatever, or Instagram account name or something, and get that applied to that. Okay, and yes, in many ways that's the same sort of way how I got my nickname, the King of Smut 95, because in many ways it was probably started to be things like the King of Porn or the King of Hentai or that kind of stuff, but that didn't have a really nice ring to it, and it was kind of hard to do. So we found something that was a little nicer, and we spruced it up a little bit, and found out the slang for smut worked really well. So then again, with the whole King of Fighters 95 game and that kind of stuff, we decided to rework that, and that's how that got assigned to me. And that now, of course, the story behind that all has to do with all the stuff that was obtained through all the conventions and that kind of stuff where I went. San Diego Comic Con 95 was probably the premiere of that stuff, and at that time that was when all the things like the Sailor Moon doujinshis and stuff came in, and of course the whole entire concept of elf hentai was another big thing because with the record of Lotus Wars. So being the primary and the person for that. Okay. Anyway, so that's my storytelling for today. So again, what you want to do right now is you want to go down below. You want to click like and you want to click subscribe, and you'll get more stories and more little features like this to come. All right. So until next time, see you again.